It was one of those afternoons that seemed almost too perfect to end. The sky hung wide and blue, sunlight spilling across the quiet suburb where the small elementary school sat at the edge of town. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and chalk dust, and the wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint laughter of children as recess began. Somewhere near the fence, a boy in a wheelchair sat by himself, a book resting on his lap. His name was Ethan Hale. He was 7 years old, polite, gentle, and far quieter than most kids his age. He had been born with a condition that made it hard for him to walk, and although the doctors said he would improve, the children never forgot the chair. They called it his throne when they wanted to be kind and his cage when they wanted to be cruel. Ethan didn't mind being quiet. He liked to watch the clouds drift, to listen to the hum of the world around him. But that day, the peace didn't last. A group of older boys came out from the far side of the playground, laughing and whispering. They were the kind of boys who followed the smell of weakness like smoke. One of them pointed at Ethan's chair, and the laughter grew louder. They walked toward him, slow, careless, full of the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "Hey, look who's back," one of them sneered, kicking a pebble toward Ethan's wheel. "Still waiting for someone to push you around?" Ethan looked down at his book, pretending not to hear. His fingers tightened on the page. The boys stepped closer. Another spoke, louder now. "You think you're better than us? Sitting there like a king." He grabbed the back of Ethan's chair and gave it a rough shake. Ethan flinched, his voice small. "Please don't." Before he could finish, a new voice cut through the noise. "Leave him alone." It was a girl's voice, clear, sharp, and certain. The boys turned. Standing a few steps away was Maya Brooks, a girl from Ethan's class. She was small for her age, with wild curls that caught the sunlight and eyes that didn't know how to back down. Her clothes were worn, her shoes scuffed, but she stood with a strength that made the boys hesitate. She took a step forward, her hands balled into fists. "Didn't you hear me?" she said. "Leave him alone." The tallest boy laughed. "Or what, Maya? You gonna stop us?" "Yes," she said simply. The word hung there, soft but steady. The boys looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or feel threatened. Maya didn't wait. She stepped between them and Ethan's chair, her small frame a wall of defiance. The boys tried to circle around, but she moved with them, her voice rising. "You think you're strong because you pick on someone who can't walk? That doesn't make you strong. That makes you cowards." The smallest boy looked uncertain now, glancing toward the school building. "Come on, let's just go," he muttered. But the leader wasn't ready to back down. His pride wouldn't let him. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over Maya. "You should mind your own business." "This is my business," she said. He shoved her shoulder, expecting her to stumble away. She didn't. She pushed back, surprising even herself. The shove wasn't hard, but it was enough to make him lose his balance for a second. His friends laughed, and that laughter cut his pride like a knife. His face twisted, and before anyone could stop him, he swung his hand, smacking the book from Ethan's lap and sending it tumbling across the dirt. Maya stepped in front of him again, blocking his way. "Stop it!" she shouted. He reached out, grabbed her arm, and tried to pull her aside. Maya twisted free and shoved him again, harder this time. He stumbled backward, tripped on the gravel, and went down. The other boys froze. For a second, no one moved. Then he got up, face red with anger. He took a step toward her, and that's when she fell. He didn't hit her hard. It was more of a clumsy swing that caught her shoulder. But she slipped on the gravel, her knee hitting the ground hard enough to draw blood. Ethan gasped, the sight of it jolting him. Maya pushed herself up, wincing, but didn't step back. "I said stop," she said again, her voice shaking now, not from fear but from pain. Something in that sound broke through the group's bravado. The boys hesitated, their confidence cracking. One of them muttered, "Come on, let's go." And they did, walking off with fake laughter, pretending it didn't bother them. When they were gone, the playground went quiet again, except for the hum of the wind through the swings. Maya turned to Ethan, brushing the dirt from her hands. "You okay?" Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "Because they were wrong," she said simply, wiping the blood from her knee with the back of her hand. "That's all." Ethan blinked, still confused. "They always do that. They don't stop." "They will," she said softly, glancing toward the gate. "Someone always has to be first to tell them no." She smiled at him then, a small, brave smile that made her eyes light up. She picked up his book, dusted it off, and placed it gently back in his lap. "Here," she said. "You dropped your story." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. A quiet understanding that sometimes heroes don't look like the ones in comic books. Sometimes they're just tired kids with scraped knees and big hearts. Across the street, parked under the shade of an old oak tree, a black car sat with its engine off. Inside, behind tinted windows, a man watched the scene unfold. Richard Hale had arrived early for his meeting with the school board. He had come expecting numbers, policies, and progress reports, not this. Through the glass, he had seen everything. His son's fear, the cruelty of the boys, the courage of a girl who owed him nothing. For a long moment, he didn't move. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel, his mind strangely quiet. Richard Hale was not a man easily surprised. Billionaires rarely were. He had built his empire from the ground up, outsmarting rivals, buying silence, calculating every move like a game of chess. But nothing in his world of boardrooms and deals had prepared him for the sight of a poor girl defending his disabled son while teachers stood in doorways pretending not to notice. He leaned back in his seat, his reflection flickering in the car window. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small, because in the span of 5 minutes, a child had done what all his money and influence never could. She had protected Ethan not for gain, not for favor, but for simple human decency. He watched as Maya helped Ethan pick up his bag and pushed his wheelchair toward the school doors, chatting like nothing had happened. The teacher on duty finally appeared, too late as always, pretending to scold the boys who had already vanished. Richard's chest tightened. He had spent years donating to this school, funding new classrooms, playgrounds, even the wheelchair ramps. Yet no one had lifted a hand to help his son. Only this little girl, with dirt on her shoes and courage in her heart. He rolled down the window slightly, listening to their voices as they neared the entrance. Ethan was smiling now, shyly thanking her. She laughed, a sound full of warmth and light. "Next time," she said, "I'll teach you how to tell them off yourself." Richard's lips curved faintly into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Next time," he murmured as if testing the words. He hadn't realized how much hope could sit in 2 simple syllables. When they disappeared inside, he stayed parked for a long while. The engine idled softly, but his mind was far louder. He thought of the meetings waiting for him, the contracts sitting on his desk, the people who flattered him because of what he owned. None of them mattered at that moment. All he could see was a brave little girl standing in front of his son, refusing to move even when it hurt. Eventually, he started the car. But instead of driving toward his meeting, he drove slowly through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, following the route the school buses took. He wanted to see where she lived, not out of curiosity, but something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. The houses grew smaller, older, paint peeling from porches, mailboxes leaning. Then he saw her, walking beside a cracked fence, her backpack dragging slightly on one strap. She was limping a little, her injured knee slowing her down, but she didn't complain. When she reached a small blue house with faded shutters, she paused to wave at an elderly neighbor before disappearing inside. Richard parked a few houses away and sat there, watching the door close. A single curtain fluttered in the window, then stilled. He sat back, the weight of the day pressing on him. In his world, people helped others for headlines, for profit, for image. But that girl, she had done it for nothing. No cameras, no crowd, no promise of reward. She had done it because it was right. The truth of it struck him hard. He thought of Ethan, lonely even in the safety of luxury. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, who had once told him that kindness wasn't inherited. It was taught. Maybe he realized now it had to be shown. That night, Long after Ethan had gone to bed, Richard sat in his study staring at the city lights outside his window. The view stretched for miles, towers of glass, highways glowing, the empire he had built brick by brick. But it all felt distant, hollow. His mind was still back at the playground, at the sound of that small voice shouting, "Leave him alone." He opened his laptop and pulled up the school's online directory, scrolling until he found her name. Maya Brooks, grade 4. Next to it, a note, scholarship declined due to limited funds. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. A child like her deserved more than the world would ever give. For the first time in a long time, Richard Hale didn't make a business decision. He made a human one. He closed the laptop, picked up his phone, and made a single call. "Find her address," he said quietly. "And tomorrow, I want to meet her family." When he hung up, he looked toward the hallway where Ethan slept, peaceful at last. "She saved you today," he whispered. "And maybe she saved me, too." Outside, the city lights flickered softly, and somewhere across town, in a small blue house, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unaware that her act of bravery had set something powerful in motion. Something that would change all their lives forever. The morning sun came slow and pale through the cracked blinds of the Brooks' small kitchen window. The smell of toast and instant coffee drifted faintly through the air, mixing with the soft hum of the old refrigerator that had a dent on one side and rattled every few minutes. The kitchen was narrow, its paint fading around the edges, but it was clean, spotless. In fact, because Maya's mother, Angela, believed that even when life gave you little, you could still keep what you had with pride. Maya sat at the table, her knee bandaged from the day before. The cut stung, but she didn't mind. Every time she looked down at it, she remembered Ethan's face. The look of relief when the bullies had finally walked away. Her mother had asked how it happened, and Maya had told her the truth, though in fewer words. "Some boys were mean to a kid in my class," she'd said. "I just stopped them." Angela hadn't scolded her. She just stared at her daughter for a long moment, then smiled softly. "You've got your father's heart," she said quietly, though Maya barely remembered her father at all. He had left when she was too young to understand what goodbye really meant. All she knew was that her mother worked long hours at the diner down the street, often coming home after dark, smelling of grease and coffee, her feet aching but her smile always gentle. That morning, Maya was packing her small backpack when a black car pulled up in front of their house. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on their street, shiny, quiet, expensive. The sound of the engine stopped, and for a few seconds, the only noise was the wind through the leaves and the faint creak of the gate as it opened. Angela frowned, wiping her hands on a towel. Visitors were rare here. She looked out the window and froze when she saw the man stepping out of the car. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, with a presence that didn't fit the worn-out sidewalks of their neighborhood. He paused at the bottom of the porch steps, taking in the small house with its peeling paint and flower pots by the door. Then he looked toward the window, meeting Angela's cautious gaze through the glass. "Maya," her mother said, her voice tight, "stay inside." Maya peeked from behind the curtain. "Who is it?" Angela didn't answer right away. She straightened her apron and opened the door. The man gave a polite nod, his expression calm but serious. "Mrs. Brooks?" he asked. "Yes," she replied slowly. "Can I help you?" He hesitated before speaking. "My name is Richard Hale. I believe your daughter and my son, Ethan, go to school together." Angela blinked, confused for a moment. The name sounded familiar. She had heard it somewhere on television, maybe on the news. Then it clicked. Richard Hale, the billionaire, the man who owned half the city's business towers. She felt a sudden unease ripple through her. "Yes, they're in the same class," she said carefully. "Did something happen?" Richard shook his head. "No, ma'am. Quite the opposite. I came to thank her." Angela's brow furrowed. "Thank her?" He nodded once, slowly. "Yesterday, your daughter defended my son when some boys were bullying him. She stepped in before any adult did. I wanted to thank her in person." Angela's shoulders relaxed a little, though she still looked uncertain. "That's kind of you," she said. But she was just doing what's right. You didn't have to come all this way. I did, Richard said simply. It mattered to me. For a moment there was silence. The wind tugged at the loose edge of the porch awning, and a bird fluttered off the fence. Angela studied the man standing before her. His clothes were spotless. His shoes probably cost more than her month's rent. But there was something in his eyes that didn't match the rest of him. Something tired, something human. Would you like to come in? She asked finally. He hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. The house was small but tidy. Richard noticed the worn sofa patched in 2 places, the shelf of books neatly arranged even though some had missing covers, and a framed picture of a little girl holding a paper trophy that said first place. Art fair. Everything smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and home. Maya appeared from the hallway, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her curls still damp from the quick wash she'd taken before school. When she saw him, her eyes widened. You're Ethan's dad, she said softly. Richard smiled faintly. I am. And you must be Maya. She nodded, suddenly shy. Her usual fire dimmed under the weight of the moment. I saw what you did yesterday, he said. You stood up for my son when no one else did. That took courage. Maya shrugged a little. They were just being mean. You got hurt, he said quietly, glancing at her bandaged knee. It's just a scratch, she replied. Ethan was scared. Richard felt something twist in his chest. The simplicity of her words, the way she spoke as if kindness were the most natural thing in the world, hit him harder than he expected. He glanced toward Angela. You've raised a remarkable daughter. Angela smiled softly. She's stubborn, that's what she is. But she's got a good heart. Richard hesitated before speaking again. I wanted to do something for her. For what she did. Angela frowned slightly. You don't owe us anything, Mr. Hale. I know, he said gently. But I'd like to help. I run a foundation that supports education. I could arrange a scholarship for Maya to attend St. William's Academy, the same school Ethan goes to. The room fell silent. Angela's eyes widened, her breath catching. That's one of the most expensive schools in the city, she said. We could never. You don't have to, Richard interrupted. Everything would be covered, tuition, supplies, transport. It's not charity. It's gratitude. Angela shook her head slowly, disbelief mixing with worry. I don't know, Mr. Hale. People don't just offer things like that. Not without wanting something in return. Richard met her eyes steadily. I don't want anything. My son needs good people in his life. Maya reminded me what that looks like. Maya looked between them, unsure what to say. Her mother's eyes were cautious, but her own heart was racing. She'd always dreamed of studying somewhere where books weren't old and broken, where classrooms smelled like paper instead of mildew. But she didn't want to seem greedy. Is Ethan okay? She asked softly. Richard smiled, a little surprised by her question. He's fine. Better, actually. He asked about you this morning. That made her blush. He did. Yes, Richard said. He said you were the bravest person he's ever met. Maya looked down, her fingers twisting around her backpack strap. He's kind? She said quietly. Angela watched the exchange, her heart softening just a little. She could see that Richard wasn't here for show. There was sincerity in his tone, something no public speech could fake. She sighed softly. You really mean this? The scholarship? I do, Richard said. No cameras, no publicity. Just an opportunity. Angela thought for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right, but I want you to promise me something, Mr. Hale. Of course. Promise me you won't make her feel small, she said firmly. She's proud, even when she has little. I don't want her to ever think she's being pitted. Richard's expression softened. I understand, and I promise. He extended his hand, and Angela shook it, her grip firm but warm. Maya couldn't stop smiling as she realized what was happening. For the first time, something that had always felt out of reach was now within her grasp. After Richard left, the black car rolled slowly down the street, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Angela stood on the porch, arms folded, watching it go. Beside her, Maya's excitement bubbled quietly. "Mom," she said, her voice almost trembling. "Do you think he really means it?" Angela smiled faintly. "I think he's a man who just remembered what it means to care." Across town, in his glass-walled office overlooking the city, Richard sat staring out the window. The skyline stretched before him, endless, glittering, and yet strangely empty. He had made hundreds of business decisions in his life, each one carefully calculated for gain. But this one felt different, felt right. He picked up a photo on his desk, a picture of Ethan and his late wife, Sarah. Her eyes, kind and calm, seemed to look back at him. She had always believed that goodness couldn't be bought, only shared. For the first time since she passed, he felt like he had done something she'd be proud of. When Ethan came home that afternoon, he found his father waiting by the living room window. "Dad?" he asked. Richard turned, smiling faintly. "I met your friend today." Ethan's face lit up. "Maya?" "Yes," Richard said. "She's going to be joining your school soon." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Richard said. "I thought it was time you had someone there who actually sees you, not the chair." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "You saw what happened?" "I did," Richard said quietly. "And I saw who stood up for you." Ethan looked down at his hands. "She's brave," he said. "I wasn't." Richard knelt beside him. "You don't have to be her kind of brave, son. You just have to learn from it. Bravery isn't always about fighting back. Sometimes it's about letting people in." Ethan thought about that, then smiled softly. "Can I call her?" Richard chuckled. "Let's wait until she starts school. Surprise her." Ethan nodded eagerly, already imagining it. That night, Richard sat alone again, but the silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. He looked out at the city lights and thought of the little girl who had stood in front of bullies without flinching. She had reminded him of something he'd long forgotten, that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. What he didn't know was that in changing hers, his own life was already beginning to unravel and rebuild in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Because sometimes, fate doesn't shout when it enters a room. It just knocks softly on a worn-out door in a quiet neighborhood, and leaves a gift that will turn everything upside down. The first day of Maya's new life began with sunlight spilling through thin curtains and the sound of her mother quietly humming in the kitchen. The melody was soft, almost uncertain, but it carried something Maya hadn't heard in her mother's voice for a long time: hope. The smell of frying eggs filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of old wood and detergent. Their house, though small, seemed brighter that morning, as if it, too, had been waiting for something good to finally happen. Angela had barely slept the night before. She'd sat at the table long after Maya went to bed, staring at the scholarship papers Richard's assistant had delivered. The official seal, the signature, the guarantee that everything was paid for. She read every line twice, trying to convince herself it wasn't some trick of kindness that would vanish by morning. But it was real. For the first time in years, something had gone right for them. Maya, meanwhile, was too excited to eat. She sat at the table, her backpack on her lap, her knees still a little sore but her smile wide. "Do you think they'll like me, Mom?" she asked, her voice hopeful and shy all at once. Angela brushed a curl from her daughter's face. "If they don't, that's their loss," she said softly. "Just be you, Maya. That's all you've ever needed to be." A black car waited outside, the same one that had brought Richard to their home days before. A driver stood beside it, polite but distant, holding the door open as Maya stepped out onto the porch. She hesitated for a moment, turning to wave at her mother, who tried to smile but found her throat too tight to speak. Angela waved back, her eyes glassy, watching as the car pulled away. Inside, Maya sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the city pass by through the tinted window streets she'd never seen before, lined with tall buildings and clean sidewalks. Felt like another world. The car stopped in front of a wide iron gate with golden letters that read St. William's Academy. The building behind it was beautiful. Tall windows, trimmed lawns, and students walking in neatly pressed uniforms. Maya's heart thumped hard. She had never seen a place like this except on television. As she stepped out, the morning sun hit her face, and for a moment she froze, overwhelmed. The driver nodded politely. "Mr. Hale asked me to walk you in," he said. She followed him quietly up the stone path, her shoes clicking softly. At the door, she saw him, Richard Hale, standing near the entrance with Ethan beside him. Ethan's face lit up when he saw her. "Maya," he called, waving his small hand. She grinned, running toward him, her nerves melting away in that single moment. "Hey," she said, out of breath. "You look better." "I am," Ethan said proudly. "Dad says you're my bodyguard now." Maya laughed. "Only if I get paid." Richard smiled faintly, watching them with quiet amusement. He was dressed in his usual suit, but his eyes seemed softer today. "I'm glad you made it," he said to Maya. "Thank you for this," she said quickly, her voice small but full of sincerity. "I'll study hard, I promise." "I don't doubt it," he replied. "And remember, you don't owe me anything. Just be the same girl who stood up for my son." She nodded, clutching the strap of her backpack tighter. Inside the school, things were different from anything she had known. The halls gleamed with polished floors, lockers lined in perfect rows, and walls filled with bright artwork and awards. Teachers greeted her politely, though some students looked at her with quiet curiosity. They could tell she didn't belong to their world of polished shoes and private tutors. But Maya didn't flinch. She met every stare with quiet strength, remembering her mother's words that morning. "Just be you." By midday, she had already made an impression. In class, when a teacher asked a question, Maya's hand was the first to rise. Her answers were thoughtful, her tone steady. She wasn't the loudest or the smartest in every subject, but she listened with her whole heart, and that made people notice. At lunch, she sat beside Ethan under a tree at the edge of the courtyard. He was quiet at first, still shy, but she had a way of making silence feel safe. "You know," she said, unwrapping her sandwich, "this place isn't as scary as it looks." Ethan smiled a little. "It's better with you here." She grinned. "Good. Then I'll stay." Across the courtyard, other students watched them. Some whispered. A few, the same kind who had once bullied Ethan, looked uneasy. They had expected the new girl to stay quiet, to stay invisible. But she wasn't invisible. She was light, soft but steady, the kind that drew people without trying. That afternoon, when school ended, Richard was waiting near the gates. He had left a meeting early just to see how the day went. Ethan rushed up to him, smiling. "Dad." Maya answered every question, and she drew this picture of a hawk. The teacher said it was amazing. Richard looked down at Maya, who blushed under the praise. "It's true?" he asked. She shrugged shyly. "I just like drawing." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then keep drawing," he said softly. Over the next few weeks, a quiet rhythm settled into their lives. Every morning, the black car arrived to pick up Maya and Ethan. Every evening, it dropped her home with her backpack full of books and her heart full of stories. At first, Angela had worried it would all be too much, that Maya would feel out of place among the children of doctors and lawyers. But Maya didn't let the difference crush her. She treated everyone the same, spoke to janitors with the same respect she gave teachers, and soon enough, her warmth began to melt the walls that surrounded Ethan's world. Before Maya, Ethan had been distant, polite but guarded. Other kids avoided him out of awkwardness, unsure of what to say or do around the boy in the chair. But Maya changed that. She pushed him into games, convinced him to answer questions in class, even teased him into smiling during lessons. "You're not glass," she told him once when he hesitated to join a group project. "You won't break if you try." And for the first time, he believed it. Richard saw it all. Every evening when Ethan came home, he was different. Lighter, happier. The laughter that used to vanish after Sarah's passing had returned. Faint at first, but growing each day. Richard had spent years surrounding his son with therapists, specialists, and private tutors, thinking he could fix his sadness with money. But it had taken one fearless little girl to do what no professional could: give him back his joy. One evening, Richard sat in his study reviewing documents while Ethan and Maya played chess at the table nearby. The sound of their laughter filled the quiet room, echoing against the shelves lined with books and awards. For a long time, Richard didn't look up, he just listened. And then, slowly, he lowered his pen and turned toward them. Ethan was grinning as Maya leaned over the board, her curls bouncing as she moved a piece. "Checkmate," she declared proudly. Ethan groaned. "No fair. You distracted me. You talk too much," she teased. "That's your problem." Richard smiled faintly. "She's right, you know." Ethan pouted, but Maya laughed, and that laughter, full of life, full of freedom, filled something in Richard that he hadn't realized was empty. For the first time in years, his house felt alive again. When Maya left that night, he walked her to the door himself. "You've brought a lot of light into this home," he said quietly. Maya looked up at him, unsure what to say. "Ethan's my friend," she said simply. "He makes me laugh." Richard nodded, his throat tight. "He makes me laugh too now." She smiled and waved before climbing into the car. That night, after the house went quiet, Richard sat alone by the window with a glass of water in his hand. The city stretched before him, glittering as always, but he saw it differently now. For years, he had measured his worth in numbers, profit margins, investments, the cold applause of success. But now, when he thought of what truly mattered, all he saw was a little girl with a scraped knee and a heart that refused to bow. He opened his laptop not for work, but to write something new. A message to his foundation director. "Find 5 children like her," he typed. "The ones who act with kindness when no one's watching. Fund their education quietly. No publicity." The next day, he visited Maya's school unannounced. When he walked into the art class, Maya nearly dropped her brush. "Mr. Hale?" she said, wide-eyed. He smiled. "I was in the neighborhood." Her classmates whispered, surprised to see the billionaire among them. But Richard didn't care. He walked over to her easel. The painting she was working on showed the playground, the one where she had first stood up for Ethan. In the picture, the sunlight seemed to touch everything except the bullies, who stood in shadow. "It's beautiful," Richard said quietly. "That's how I remember that day too." Maya looked up at him, smiling shyly. "It was just a normal day." "Not to me," he said softly. Later, when the bell rang, he offered to drive her home. She hesitated at first, but he insisted. During the drive, she looked out the window, her voice small. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Hale?" He thought about it for a long time before answering. "Because you reminded me what it means to be human," he said simply. "And because my son needed someone like you, someone who doesn't see what he can't do, but who sees what he is." Maya smiled quietly, understanding more than she could express. When she got home, Angela met them at the door. She thanked Richard again, but he only shook his head. "You gave the world someone kind," he said. "The thanks is mine." As the car pulled away, Maya stood on the porch, watching it disappear down the road. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it didn't scare her. Somewhere deep inside, she felt that this was just the beginning. Not of wealth or privilege, but of something stronger, something real. And miles away, as Richard sat at his desk watching the city lights fade into dusk, he realized that his offer, the one no one expected, had changed him more than he could have ever imagined. Because kindness, once given freely, doesn't just lift others. It rebuilds the giver piece by piece, until even the coldest heart begins to feel warm again. In the living room of the Hale mansion, her hands resting on the thick pages of a book Ethan had asked her to read aloud. The fireplace crackled softly, its light flickering against the polished marble floor, but the warmth it gave seemed strange. More like the kind of warmth that tries to hide coldness underneath. Ethan was half asleep beside her, his head tilted against the side of his chair, the book slipping slowly from his lap. Maya smiled, closed the cover gently, and whispered, "Good night, champ." She stood quietly, tucking a blanket around him before turning to look around the enormous room. It was beautiful, yes, but in that moment it felt lonely. The walls were lined with trophies, awards, photos of business events, and glossy faces smiling for cameras, but not one picture showed laughter. Not one showed the kind of messy happiness that existed in small homes like hers. Somewhere in those quiet shadows, something about this world didn't feel right. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel it. The silence was too heavy, the perfection too forced. She glanced at the large glass window overlooking the city. Far below, cars streamed like veins of light. The world looked peaceful, yet she could sense that the man who owned all of it was not at peace at all. In the study down the hall, Richard Hale sat behind his massive oak desk, but he wasn't reading or writing. He was staring at the phone, the screen glowing faintly with a name that had appeared 3 times that evening, M. Caldwell. Each time he'd ignored it. Each time he'd clenched his jaw tighter. But the truth didn't disappear when you ignored it. It waited, growing heavier. When the call came again, he finally answered. His voice was quiet, tired. "What do you want, Mark?" A man's voice, sharp and smooth like glass, answered. "I want what you promised, Richard. You think you can back out now? You owe us. You used our funds for that little side project of yours, the foundation, the charity. That wasn't the deal." Richard rubbed his temples. "It was my money. Your money was ours once it was invested," the voice snapped. "Do you think being generous will save you when the numbers don't add up? The board's watching. They're asking questions. The collapse is coming, Richard. You can't buy silence forever." "Then let it come," Richard said softly. "Maybe it's time." He hung up before the voice could respond. For a moment, the silence in the study was deafening. The ticking of the wall clock sounded too loud. The shadows seemed to press closer. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The empire he had built was cracking, one secret at a time. It wasn't just money, it was trust, it was reputation, it was everything the world said he was. And the more he tried to fix it, the more it slipped through his fingers. But then he thought of Maya. Her words still echoed from their last talk in the car. "You reminded me what it means to be human." Maybe she hadn't realized, but he had needed to hear that more than she would ever know. The next morning, Maya noticed something different. When the driver dropped her off at school, there were reporters near the gate, flashing cameras at the black car as it drove away. She could hear their voices, sharp and curious. "Is it true Hale Industries is in trouble? Has the board forced him to step down? Is he selling his assets?" She didn't understand what it all meant, but she felt unease tighten in her chest. That afternoon, when the car picked her up again, the driver's face was tense. "Mr. Hale is waiting at home," he said quietly. "He's had a difficult day." The drive felt longer than usual. When they reached the mansion, Maya noticed the staff moving quickly, whispering, their faces tight with worry. She found Richard in the garden, sitting alone by the fountain, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke softly. "Are you okay?" He looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "I've been better." She sat beside him on the cold stone edge of the fountain. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "Do you ever feel like you've built something that wasn't meant to last?" She frowned, confused. "Like a sandcastle?" He chuckled weakly. "Something like that." He leaned back, staring at the sky. "You know, when I was your age, I thought success meant never needing anyone. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could control everything. But now I'm realizing control is an illusion. Sometimes life reminds you that even the tallest towers can fall. But you can build again," she said softly, remembering her mother's words. "If you fall, you just start over. My mom says people only lose when they stop trying." Richard looked at her then, really looked, and for a brief moment he saw his wife's spirit in that child's small face. Sarah had said things like that once, simple, wise, unbreakable. "You sound a lot like someone I used to know," he said quietly. Maya smiled, swinging her legs slightly. "Was she nice?" "She was everything," he said. His voice broke a little, but he didn't look away. "She taught me what love meant, and I think I forgot for a long time." Maya looked down at the water rippling in the fountain. "Maybe that's why I met you," she said suddenly. So you could remember. Richard's heart clenched. She said it so casually, as if the universe worked that simply. But somehow, in that moment, he believed her. That night, long after Maya had gone home, Richard stood in his office staring at his reflection in the dark glass. Behind him, the city glowed faintly, but its light no longer impressed him. The reflection looking back at him wasn't the man the world saw, the billionaire, the philanthropist, the powerful figure in the newspapers. It was a man afraid of what he had become, of the choices that had led him here. He turned off his phone and sank into his chair. In his drawer, hidden beneath folders, lay an old letter written in his wife's hand. He unfolded it slowly, the paper fragile from years of being read too many times. "Promise me," it read, "that when the world starts to feel too heavy, you won't forget who you are. And if you do, find someone who reminds you." He smiled sadly. "I found her," he whispered. But fate, as always, was listening. Over the next few days, things worsened. News broke that Hale Industries was under investigation for financial mismanagement. The stock prices plummeted. Business partners began to withdraw. And though Richard tried to shield Ethan and Maya from it, the storm grew too loud to hide. Teachers whispered. Parents pulled their children aside. Even the school principal, who had once smiled so widely in Richard's presence, now avoided his calls. One afternoon, Maya overheard two parents in the hallway. "He's finished," one said. "All that money gone. They say he'll lose everything." "Well," the other replied coldly, "maybe he deserves it. Men like that always fall eventually." Maya walked away, her chest tight. When she got home that evening, she found Richard sitting in the dim light of his study. Papers were scattered across the desk, and his tie hung loose around his neck. He looked older than he had a week ago. "Mr. Hale?" she said softly. He looked up slowly. "You should be home, Maya." "I was worried," she said. "People are saying things about you." "People always say things," he murmured. "But sometimes they're right." "Did you do something bad?" she asked, her voice trembling. He froze, staring at her small, honest face. The question pierced through every layer of pride he had built around himself. After a long silence, he shook his head. "No, Maya, I didn't do something bad. I just forgot what good meant for too long." She took a step closer, her voice small but steady. "Then remember again, like you told me to keep drawing. You can start again too." Richard smiled faintly. "You really believe that?" "Yes," she said simply. "You helped me. Now I help you." Her words were soft, but they carried more truth than any speech he had ever heard in a boardroom. He looked away, blinking back the sting in his eyes. "You know, Maya," he said after a moment, "I used to think people came into my life because I could give them something, but maybe you came into mine because I needed to learn how to lose." She frowned. "Why would you want to lose?" "Because sometimes," he whispered, "you have to lose everything to remember what really matters." Maya didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. She stepped closer, placing her small hand on his. "Then don't give up. Not yet." He smiled, covering her hand gently. "You sound like my son now." "That's because we both like you," she said. And for the first time in days, Richard laughed, quietly but genuinely. Later that night, when Maya had gone home and the house was silent again, Richard stood by the window and watched the rain begin to fall. Each drop slid down the glass like a tiny truth he could no longer ignore. The world outside his mansion was moving on without him, but somewhere inside, something was finally waking up. He was losing everything, his money, his image, his power, but maybe, just maybe, he was finding himself. Upstairs, Ethan slept peacefully, unaware of the chaos his father faced. In another part of the city, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mother reading quietly beside her. The storm rumbled outside, distant but growing. Both the child and the man who had once thought he ruled the world were learning the same lesson, that sometimes the hardest fall isn't the one that breaks you. It's the one that teaches you how to stand again. And neither of them knew that by the time the rain stopped, everything they knew about kindness, trust, and love would be tested in ways they never imagined. The storm that had been rumbling in the distance finally came crashing down, not with thunder or lightning, but with headlines and whispers that spread faster than rain across glass. By the time the sun rose, the name Richard Hale was no longer spoken with admiration. It was spoken with disbelief, anger, and pity. Newspapers printed words like fraud, collapse, betrayal, and his photograph, once a symbol of wealth and power, now carried the face of a man accused of losing everything. The news anchors spoke his name with rehearsed sadness, their voices pretending to care. His empire had cracked overnight. Banks withdrew loans, partners vanished, employees resigned. By noon, Hale Industries was declared insolvent. The mansion that had once been filled with polished laughter was now a museum of silence. Most of the staff had already packed their things and left, their polite farewells fading as the front gate closed behind them. Only one car remained in the driveway, the same black sedan that had once brought comfort, now standing like a monument to everything that was gone. Richard sat in the study, the same room that had once smelled of success and now smelled of dust and sleepless nights. His phone buzzed nonstop, calls from lawyers, reporters, even former friends, but he didn't pick up. He just sat there, staring at the empty fireplace, listening to the house creak in the wind. For the first time in decades, there was no plan, no control, no solution waiting behind the next signature. Everything had fallen apart. And yet, in the middle of that destruction, there was still one sound that reminded him of life. Ethan's laughter drifting faintly from upstairs. Maya had come over after school despite her mother's warning to stay out of grown-up problems. She didn't care about headlines or money. She cared that Ethan's father hadn't been at the school gate that day, and that when the car didn't come, Ethan had looked out the window, quiet and confused. So she walked home with him. They played chess in the living room again, though the fire was out this time and the air carried a chill. "Dad says we might have to move," Ethan said quietly, moving his pawn. "Do you think people will hate us now?" Maya frowned, pushing her piece forward. "People forget things fast," she said. "They'll find someone else to talk about next week." "But what if he goes to jail?" Ethan's voice cracked, the words trembling with fear he tried to hide. Maya looked up at him. "He won't," she said firmly, even though she didn't really know. "He's not like those people they talk about on TV. He's good." Ethan nodded, though he didn't look convinced. The game ended without either of them keeping score. When Maya helped him back to his room, she found Richard standing in the hallway, still in his wrinkled shirt, his tie gone, his eyes red but calm. He had been listening. "You should go home, Maya," he said softly. "It's late." "I don't mind staying," she said. "Ethan's scared." "I know," Richard replied, his voice quiet. "So am I." He forced a small smile, but his eyes gave him away. He looked tired, not just from work or scandal, but from life itself. "Come," he said. "Let me drive you home." On the way, neither of them spoke for a long time. The car rolled through the dark streets, the city lights reflecting faintly in the window like ghosts of a life that had vanished overnight. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "What they're saying about you?" Richard sighed. "Some of it," he said after a pause, "but not the parts that matter. I didn't steal. I didn't cheat. I just trusted the wrong people, and I forgot what I stood for." "So you didn't do anything bad?" "I did," he said, his voice lower now. "I forgot that people are more important than power. That's how bad things start. Not with greed, but with forgetting." She didn't completely understand, but she listened. That was enough for him. When the car stopped outside her small house, he turned to her and said quietly, "Maya, I might not be around much longer, but I want you to remember something. Money can build walls, but kindness breaks them. Don't ever let this world teach you to stop caring." Maya nodded, her small hand gripping the strap of her backpack. "I won't," she said. He smiled faintly, and for a moment, it felt like peace. But peace never stays where storms still breathe. The next morning, the world woke up to chaos. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates. Drones hovered above the property. Strangers shouted questions Richard never answered. He had stopped giving statements. There was nothing left to say. His name was now a story for people to argue about over breakfast. Some said he deserved it. Others said he was framed. To him, it didn't matter anymore. He had built an empire out of stone and logic, but the one thing that had ever truly mattered, the people, had been fragile all along. That afternoon, when Maya came by again, the gates were locked. A guard stopped her, shaking his head. "Mr. Hale isn't seeing anyone." "But I'm his son's friend," she said. "He'll want to see me." "Sorry, kid," the guard muttered. "Orders." Maya stood there for a long moment, gripping the bars of the gate. She could see the house in the distance, its windows dark. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a secret. She turned and walked home with her throat tight, fighting the sting in her eyes. That night, Ethan called her from a borrowed phone. His voice was small. "We're leaving," he whispered. "Where?" "I don't know. Dad says it's just for a while. He says it's safer somewhere else." "Safer from what?" "People," Ethan said quietly. "From what people do when they're angry." Maya didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him it would be okay. But the words felt heavy. False. All she could whisper was, "Don't forget me." "I won't," Ethan said. "Dad says good people never disappear." Then the line went dead. Over the next week, the mansion emptied. Reporters lost interest. The headlines moved on to newer scandals. When Maya passed by the hill where the house stood, she saw only darkness. The fountain was dry. The windows were boarded. The black car was gone. It was as if the Hales had never lived there at all. But life went on. Maya still went to school, though things felt different now. Her scholarship remained. The teachers still smiled. But there was a shadow behind every good day. A silence that followed her whenever she looked at the empty seat beside her in class. Sometimes she'd catch herself glancing at the playground, half expecting to see Ethan there again. His small hands holding a book, his quiet smile waiting for her. But the bench stayed empty. One cold evening, weeks later, there was a knock on the Brooks' door. Angela opened it to find a man in a gray coat holding a letter. "Delivery for Miss Maya Brooks," he said. His voice was formal, but his eyes were kind. Maya came forward, her hands trembling slightly as she took the envelope. It was thick, sealed with gold ink. The handwriting was neat and familiar. She opened it carefully. "Dear Maya," it read, "if you're reading this, then you know that things have changed. I've had to step away for a while to fix what I broke. I don't know when or if I'll come back, but I need you to do something for me. Keep being who you are. Don't let the world teach you bitterness. People will forget your kindness sometimes, but don't ever let that stop you. You gave my son courage. You reminded me what love looks like when it isn't for sale. That's worth more than all the gold I ever owned. Take care of your mother. Take care of your dreams. And if the world ever makes you doubt yourself, look up at the stars. Somewhere under the same sky we'll both be trying again. Richard Hale." Maya's eyes blurred as she finished reading. Angela stood beside her, silent. She didn't need to ask what it said. She could see it in her daughter's face. The mix of sadness and pride that comes only from knowing someone's pain but also their redemption. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the letter folded neatly beside her, and stared at the stars, wondering where Richard and Ethan were now. Maybe in another city, starting over. Maybe somewhere quiet, where no one cared about money or scandal. She hoped they were okay. She hoped he was still remembering what it meant to be good. And though she didn't know it, across hundreds of miles, in a small coastal town where the waves crashed against the cliffs, Richard sat by another window under the same stars, holding a photograph of Ethan and Maya smiling together. The wind howled outside, but inside he felt calm for the first time in years. He whispered the words she had once said to him, "Then build again." And in that whisper was the beginning of something new. A man who had lost everything but found the one thing money could never buy again. A reason to start over. The months slipped by quietly, one season folding into another like pages turning in a book no one wanted to end. The memory of the Hale scandal faded from news screens, replaced by new names, new faces, new chaos for people to gossip about. But in the small blue house on the edge of town, the story of kindness that had once changed everything still lived quietly in the hearts of two people who refused to forget. Maya grew taller, her voice steadier, her mind sharper, but she still carried the same warmth she always had. Every evening after school, she would sit on the porch with her sketchbook, drawing scenes of the playground, the city, and sometimes, without meaning to, a small boy in a wheelchair with a shy smile. She didn't talk about them much anymore, Ethan or his father, but they lived quietly in her drawings, in the way she still looked for good in every stranger's face. Her mother noticed it, though she never said it aloud. Angela would watch her daughter sketching in the fading light, her curls catching the gold of sunset, and think how kindness could take root in the smallest moments and never die, no matter how cruel the world became. But that spring, everything changed again. It started with a letter, the same way the story had once paused. The mailman handed it to Angela one quiet morning. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting was unmistakable, neat, deliberate, and familiar. RH was written on the corner in small, careful letters. Angela called out, "Maya, you've got something." Maya came running from her room, wiping graphite from her fingers. She stared at the letter for a long moment before opening it. The paper inside was simple, the ink dark and steady. "Dear Maya," it began. "If this reaches you, it means we've finally found home again. Ethan's walking now, slowly, but he's doing it. He wanted to tell you first. He says you gave him courage when the doctors couldn't. I thought you should know that he remembers every word you ever said. As for me, I've started over. I'm not rich anymore, but I'm alive in ways I never was before. We run a small community project now, helping rebuild schools and homes that others forgot. We use what little we have to make something that lasts. If you and your mother ever want to visit, there will always be a place here for you. I hope you're still drawing. The world needs people who see beauty when others only see loss. Richard Hale." The paper trembled slightly in her hands as she finished reading. Her mother's voice was soft. "He wrote again?" Maya nodded. "He said Ethan's walking." The words felt heavy with wonder, like a miracle spoken quietly, so it wouldn't break. Angela smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. "He'll want to see you. Do you think we should go?" Maya asked. "He helped us once. Maybe it's time we help him." Angela thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, sometimes visiting old friends is the best way to remind yourself who you were." 2 weeks later, they packed a small bag and took the train to the coast. The ride was long, the tracks winding through fields and towns that grew smaller and smaller until all that was left was the sound of the sea in the distance. When they stepped off the platform, the air smelled of salt and wildflowers. The town was nothing like the city they had left. It was slower, softer, the kind of place where people smiled when they passed you on the street. At the edge of the cliffs, surrounded by rolling hills, stood a modest white house with a hand-painted sign near the gate that read the Lighthouse Project. Maya smiled when she saw it. "He called it a lighthouse," she whispered. "Maybe because it helps people find their way back." They walked up the gravel path, the sound of waves breaking faintly in the distance. A man stood near the porch, his hands resting on the railing. His hair was grayer now, his face thinner, but his eyes were the same, steady and kind. Richard looked up, and when he saw them, his breath caught for a moment. "You came," he said, his voice breaking into a smile. Maya nodded, suddenly shy. "You invited us." He laughed softly. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "I could never forget," she said. And before he could say another word, Ethan appeared at the door, leaning on a cane, walking carefully but proudly, his face glowing with effort and joy. "Maya!" he called, his voice full of life. She ran forward, meeting him halfway, and for a moment, the years fell away. The playground, the bullies, the mansion, the silence, they all faded. What was left was friendship, pure and simple. "You're walking," she whispered, smiling through tears. "You said I could," he replied, his grin wide. Richard watched them from the porch, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. There was no mansion now, no fortune, no cameras, just this. A boy who had learned to stand again. a girl who had reminded him how to live, and a mother who had taught her daughter that decency was never wasted. Later that evening, they sat together under the golden light of sunset. The sea stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, turning orange and pink as the waves caught fire with the last of the day. Richard poured tea for everyone and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think success meant never falling, but it's not. Success is getting up again, especially when you've lost everything." Angela smiled. "You built something better this time," she said. "Something money can't buy." "Maybe," Richard replied, "but I didn't build it alone. It started with a girl who believed kindness was enough." Maya looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't do anything special." "You did," Richard said gently. "You saw people, Maya. That's rarer than gold." The sun slipped lower, the sound of the waves steady and calm. Ethan leaned his head on his father's shoulder, the cane resting beside his chair. "Dad says we're going to build more schools," he said. "He wants to name one after you." Maya blinked. "After me?" "After the girl who stood up," Richard said softly. "The girl who reminded a broken world what courage looks like." She smiled, her throat tight. "Then we'll build it together." They sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade over the water. The air grew cool, and the first stars began to appear. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the ocean. It sounded like forgiveness. It sounded like peace. When she opened them again, Richard was looking out toward the horizon, his face calm. "Do you ever think," he said quietly, "that life gives us the same lessons over and over until we finally learn them?" Maya thought for a moment. "Maybe. Or maybe it just gives us chances to fix what we got wrong the first time." Richard nodded. "Then I guess I finally learned mine." The moon rose above the sea, pale and full. The waves rolled in gentle patterns below the cliffs. For a long time, no one spoke. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, alive, glowing with gratitude. When it was time to leave, Maya hugged Ethan tightly. "Don't stop walking," she whispered. "Not ever. Only if you don't stop drawing," he said with a grin. Richard shook Angela's hand, his grip warm, his eyes wet. "You raised her well," he said softly. "She raised me," Angela replied. They all laughed, the sound easy and bright under the night sky. As Maya and her mother walked down the path toward the road, she turned one last time to look back. The porch light was still on, glowing faintly in the distance, a small, steady beacon against the dark. It looked exactly like what the sign promised. A lighthouse. She smiled, whispering to herself, "He built it again." The waves crashed far below. The wind carried the smell of salt and renewal, and somewhere behind her, a man who had lost everything stood watching the stars, thankful for the little girl who had taught him that sometimes the smallest kindness can rebuild an entire life. The morning after Maya's visit, the sea lay still under a pale sky, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. The waves brushed against the rocks in slow rhythm, whispering stories only the wind could carry. Richard stood by the window of the small white house, watching the horizon as dawn poured its soft light over the cliffs. The air smelled of salt and earth and second chances. For a long time he just stood there, hands in his pockets, listening to the sounds of a home that was no longer cold. From the kitchen came the faint rattle of dishes and the sound of Ethan's laughter, light and free, like bells in a church far away. It was the kind of sound he had once thought he would never hear again. When Maya and her mother had left the night before, something in him had settled, something that had been restless for too many years. He felt lighter now, not because the world had forgiven him, but because he had finally forgiven himself. The guilt, the losses, the ruin of his empire, they were all still there, shadows that would never fully fade. But the difference was that they no longer defined him. He was no longer the man who measured life in profits. He was simply a father, a teacher, and a man who had once fallen and found something greater in the dirt. He looked down at the work table near the window. On it lay a stack of blueprints for a new school building, one of the first to be built under the Lighthouse Project. Across the top of the first page was written in simple letters, "The Maya Brook Center for Children." He smiled when he saw it. Naming it after her hadn't been his idea, it was Ethan's. The boy had said it one night while they were eating dinner by the fire. "She gave me courage," he'd said. "If we're building schools to teach people kindness, then it should start with her name." And Richard hadn't argued. Felt right. That morning, the volunteers began to arrive. Local builders, retired teachers, even a few fishermen who had come to help dig foundations near the old field beyond the cliffs. The sound of hammers, laughter, and saws filled the air. For the first time in a long time, Richard's hands were covered in dirt, not ink. He lifted wood, mixed concrete, and drew lines on the ground where walls would one day stand. He worked beside the men, sweating under the sun, and when his back began to ache, he didn't complain. He felt alive, part of something real again. During lunch, he sat on a low stone wall overlooking the water, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Ethan sat beside him, his cane resting across his knees, a sandwich in one hand, and a grin on his face. "Dad," he said between bites, "you think Maya will come back when the school opens?" "She'll come," Richard said with quiet certainty. "She always keeps her promises." "I want to show her how fast I can walk now," Ethan said proudly, lifting the cane slightly off the ground. "You'll probably run circles around her," Richard said, chuckling. "Maybe," Ethan said, "but she still wins at chess." Richard smiled, looking out at the waves again. "She wins at everything that matters," he murmured. The days turned into weeks. The school began to rise, brick by brick, wall by wall. The locals said they had never seen the old cliffs so alive with purpose. Children came to watch, sitting on rocks as men and women built classrooms overlooking the sea. There was laughter, music, even hope. Word spread to neighboring towns, and soon donations began to trickle in. Not from rich investors or corporations, but from farmers, teachers, fishermen, people who had little to give but gave anyway. It was a miracle in slow motion, one Richard didn't need to own, only to witness. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the ocean in gold and fire, he found himself walking alone along the beach. His footsteps left faint prints in the wet sand that vanished as soon as the tide rolled in. He thought of the mansion that had once stood over the city, now sold and silent. He thought of the power he had once held, the meetings, the applause, the fear of losing what he couldn't carry into eternity. None of it had ever meant as much as this quiet walk beside the sea. When he returned home, Ethan was asleep on the couch, a book still open on his chest. Richard gently took it away, smiled at the worn pages, and turned off the lamp. He went to the porch where the night air was cool and looked up at the stars. The same stars that had shone over his darkest nights now felt like companions instead of judges. Somewhere far inland, in a small city surrounded by streetlights, another window glowed faintly. Maya sat there, sketching by candlelight, drawing a scene she remembered from her visit. The cliffs, the waves, the man and the boy she had once protected. Her mother watched from the doorway, smiling quietly. "Still awake?" she asked. "Almost done," Maya said, her pencil moving with careful strokes. When she finished, she looked down at her drawing and smiled. In the corner, she wrote a few words in small letters. "For the people who build again." She folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope. On the front, she wrote, "For Mr. Hale and Ethan." A week later, the envelope arrived at the White House by the cliffs. Richard found it in the mailbox and carried it inside, curious. When he opened it, the drawing took his breath away. The picture showed the lighthouse project exactly as it was now. Unfinished walls, open sky, people laughing as they worked. But in the background, a tall lighthouse rose, its beam cutting through clouds, lighting the path for ships at sea. At the bottom of the drawing, beside Maya's small handwriting, she had drawn two figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side, watching the light. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at it. For a moment he couldn't move. Then he smiled, folded the drawing carefully, and pinned it to the wall above his desk. That night, as the moon rose and bathed the half-built school in silver, Richard stood outside, his hands in his pockets, the wind cool against his face. He looked toward the stars, whispering, "Thank you." The waves answered softly, breaking on the rocks below. When the school finally opened months later, Maya and her mother returned for the ceremony. The building stood strong and bright against the blue sky, the laughter of children echoing across the cliffs. The sign above the door read, "The Maya Brooks Center for Children." Maya tried to hide her tears when she saw it, but they came anyway. Ethan actually ran, the last few steps toward her, laughing, his cane forgotten behind him. "You made me famous," she said, laughing through her tears. "You made me walk," he replied. Richard stood behind them, watching with quiet pride. When he stepped forward, Maya hugged him tightly. "You built it," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "You did." The crowd clapped as the ribbon was cut. Children ran through the halls, exploring rooms filled with books and colors. Teachers smiled. The air felt like a promise kept. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in gold once more, Richard stood on the porch of the school, Ethan beside him, Maya and Angela nearby. The light from the windows glowed across the cliffs like candles guiding lost ships home. He took a deep breath, the wind carrying salt and peace through his lungs. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man trying to prove himself. He just felt human. The stars appeared one by one, their light steady and ancient. Ethan leaned against him, tired but happy. "Dad?" he whispered. "Yeah. Do you think Mom can see this?" Richard looked up at the stars. "I think she can see everything," he said quietly. "And I think she's smiling." Maya smiled too, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "She'd be proud of you." Richard looked at her then, the girl who had once stood between cruelty and innocence, and nodded. "No, Maya. She'd be proud of you." The waves crashed softly below, the lighthouse light turning slow circles across the dark sea, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped spinning to watch them, to witness the quiet redemption of one man, one boy, and one girl who had refused to walk away when it mattered most. And as night fell, the light from the lighthouse project shone far across the water, steady and unwavering. A reminder that even after loss, even after ruin, there is always a way to build again.